This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
Michigan attempts to reboot its season with Alex Orji at starting quarterback. We'll get into that in great detail and more next on this week's episode of Michigan Podcast.
But there's going to be one team that's going to play solely as a team. No man is more important than the team. No coach is more important than the team. The team, the team, the team.
Looks deep for Anthony Clark. Waits for it. Gets caught.
They said you can't beat Ohio State. Now what?
Brady gets terrific. Throws it. Get it. Touchdown. Knight again. Schultz just before Brazil got him. And a leaping interception by Woodson.
Harbaugh back to throw over the middle. Caught by Collier at the 5 on his feet. Touchdown, Michigan. On its way. It's good.
He's 5'7", 179 pounds, a junior at Michigan. But Jamie Morris packs a wallop, and he delivers for Bo Schembechler.
And here's your first play. Pressure coming. Sack. It is Glenn Steele, number 81, who fought his way through the traffic.
Option. And Robinson calls his own number, and he's going to score. Oh, an easy touchdown for Robinson and Michigan.
We're going to win the championship again because we're going to play as a team. And when we play as a team and the old season is over, you and I know it's going to be Michigan again. Michigan.
Hey, Go Blue, I'm Steve Deace. Welcome to this week's episode of Michigan Podcast. And essentially, Michigan is saying, we want a do-over. All right. On Monday, Sharon Moore, Michigan's head coach, came out and essentially gave the my bust analysis and announcement when he said that Michigan was switching to Alex Orji. And I think the fact that they didn't let this play out all week, because you could have just simply let Orji take the majority of first-team reps in practice, kept it under wraps, and then not given USC any kind of a hint of what you were going to do. I think, but the fact Michigan came out right away Monday without even being asked, Sharon Moore said, we're making the switch to Alex Orji at quarterback. We're behind him. I think that was essentially saying, my bad. Okay. And here's the thing. And this is going to sound like a criticism, and it is, but it's really not harsh. It's probably to be expected. I think Sharon Moore is in a little bit over his head right now, right? This is a big job. I mean, this is one of the biggest jobs in American sports, Michigan football coach. This is the winningest program of all time, 12 national champions, including last year, multiple Heisman Trophy winners, over 100 consensus All-Americans. This is the program that invented modern marketing in collegiate sports and licensing deals. It's the biggest stadium in the sport. It's the largest alumni base on the planet. This is a big job, and it's just not the same. When you've never been a head coach before. Even the 3 years Gary Moeller had at Illinois where he face planted at least gave him some experience in that chair. All right. And then, Gary Moeller was both an offensive and defensive coordinator at Michigan. So he had been on both sides of the ball. He was about as well prepared as possible. And even after a couple of meh years, the job kind of swallowed him up. He acted out one night at a restaurant, got fired, and that was the end. It's a hard job. And so it probably should be expected that a guy who's never sat in that chair before anywhere maybe has made a couple of snafus, stepped on a few rakes, for example. I think it's pretty obvious we've been playing the wrong center. If you watch the game, and I don't want to hear, well, analytics, I don't care what your analytics suck, all right? I mean, I love analytics much as the next guy, but my eyes, I go with that first, okay? The analytics tell you Kate Upton's really not that hot. Your analytics suck, all right? Because the level of precision that we saw with point of attack blocking with Greg Crippen at center compared to Dominique Jadis on Saturday against Arkansas State just wasn't even close. So Maybe reboot your algorithm, unplug it, and plug it back in. I think Michigan's been playing the wrong RB1. I mean, Kalel Mullings was the number 1 rated running back in America, according to Pro Football Focus's analytics. So there's your beloved analytics for you. He was the number 1 rated running back in the country last week. Had 3 30-plus yard runs, 150 yards, averaged about 8 yards a pop. Well, Steve, it's Arkansas State, one of the worst rush defenses in the country. You're right. And that's what you should be doing against that team. But he was the one doing it. So recognize. I mean, Michigan's only had, I think, 14 300-yard rushing games in like the last 10 years. Hadn't had a 300-yard rushing game, I think, since 2021, I think. So those still aren't easy to do. I guess, especially with the shortened clock. You're not running as many snaps. So with the shortened clock and you're running the ball, that clock is a-going. So getting over 300 yards is tougher than ever before, no matter whom you're rushing against, just because there's only so much time you have. So that it's clear that he's the RB1. Now, if you got to start Donovan because he's a captain and he's still a really good player too, fine. But the level of carries here, there should not be for the foreseeable future any games, unless he gets unfortunately banged up, where Donovan Edwards has more carries than Kalel Mullings. Maybe more touches. Heaven forbid, heavens to Betsy, we get creative here and put them both on the field at the same time and gasp. The defense doesn't know who's going to get the ball or how, but that would apparently be a terrible. All right. So I'm fine with Donovan getting more overall touches than Kalel, but he should not be getting more carries. And it's also, I've been screaming this for weeks. We're playing the wrong quarterback, and I don't have to be a day at practice. Because I can watch Davis Warren, and it's not any good. It's a great story. Okay. Love the kid. I'm sure he's a great kid, great family. There's lots of great kids, great families that are great success stories that should not be the starting quarterback at the University of Michigan. And he just happens to obviously be one of them. Michigan's had 28 offensive possessions this year under Davis Warren. 7 of them had ended in turnovers. That's 1 out of every 4 possessions, man. You cannot do that anywhere. Couldn't do that in college basketball where you get, 70 possessions a game? You can't do that here. And he did. And we throw 3 picks against Arkansas State, the worst team on your schedule. That's it, no. And you don't get mulligans. This isn't J.J. McCarthy against Bowling Green, who, by the way, was a pretty good group of 5 team and way better than Arkansas State. You get a mulligan against Bowling Green if you're J.J. You don't get any mulligans if you're Davis Warren. And the idea that this kid was this much better of a passer that it justified taking one of the best athletes on the team and putting him on the bench and holding a clipboard just made no sense whatsoever. And I think they recognize that. I have a theory as to why they did what they did with Davis Warren. I think they really do want to be more balanced, and they were trying to feature stuff to future quarterback recruits like Brady Hart and future wide receiver recruits like Andrew Marsh, because Michigan's getting negative recruited at the skill positions like a mother because of its offensive scheme. But in the end, speaking of scheme, you cannot coach to your scheme. You got to coach to the actual team that you have. And this is the team we have. All right. At least with Orji, I have no idea how good of a thrower he is, and I suspect it's probably not very good. But at least on every single down, his legs are a threat. With Davis Warren, neither his arm nor his legs are a threat. You can't do that. Your quarterback can't be a 0. Yeah, that's Deacon Hill at Iowa, and that's what we had. You can't do that. At the very least, Orji's legs are a threat every play. A defense will have to account for that every play, and that will open up running lanes. And who cares if we go to an option offense? The most successful offense in college football right now, other than the air raid, is the zone read offense with the RPO. That's essentially a modern triple option veer in a shotgun. Quarterback has 3 options like a wishbone, but you're in a veer shotgun formation, and you've got an opportunity to hand it off to the back. You've got an opportunity to tuck and run it yourself. And if the linebackers cheat up, you've got the opportunity to throw it behind them on the RPO. That's a triple option offense. And that's the offense that most of the best teams in the country are running. So, okay. This was long overdue. My fear is the timing. We waited too late. We're going to do it now in a high-profile game when the entire season basically is on the brink. And that's maybe too much to ask out of Alex Orji out of the break or right from the jump. And that's why I wanted him to start last week to kind of get some stuff ironed out. But at least USC will have no idea necessarily what kind of packaging we're going to run on Saturday, and that's me looking for the optimistic view. So, yeah, I do think Sharon Moore is in a little bit over his head. And I think some of that decision-making has demonstrated itself to be incorrect. Not always. I mean, a lot of times the fan trope, the obvious fan tropes are wrong. And things are more complicated than that. But in this case, the fan tropes are correct. We were right. The coaches were wrong. And coaches are wrong a lot. That's why they get fired. Okay, it's football. It's not a Rubik's Cube. We're not doing cold fusion here. We're not splitting atoms. It's friggin' football. Okay? And if your quarterback isn't much of a thrower because he can't stretch the field and or turns the ball over too much, and then he's not a threat to break a defense with its legs, you're screwed. You cannot win that way. You cannot hide your quarterback in college football. So let's go. Let's hope we catch USC by surprise. Let's hope that this gives the team a little bit more juice. But at the very least, Michigan is starting this season all over, and we'll wait and see what becomes of it. Here's the most optimistic take of them all. We just won the Natty. We'll talk to Mark Rogers here next. All right, well, let's get to a more objective viewpoint, maybe. We'll see. Our good friend Mark Rogers joins us for the 10-Minute War, our weekly homage to the legendary 10-year war between Woody and Bo. He is our perhaps only reasonable Bucknut friend. He also has a fantastic channel right here on YouTube you want to check out as well as the voice of college football. And so, Mark Rogers, we welcome you back, brother. How you doing?
I am doing just fine, Steve. I enjoyed watching the Arkansas State game. I will say that as I was being introduced there, 28-18 stuck into my head, and then I thought, okay, that's a nice little question to ask to Steve and the audience here that are die-in-the-wool Ohio State and Michigan fans here. 28-18, does that bring any particular
game to mind? That was the final score of Bo's last game at the Big House. Beat Ohio State. That was a rare Thanksgiving weekend game before the 12-game schedule because of where the calendar went down. You know, every now and then that game would be played over Thanksgiving weekend. That game was. That was Bo's last game. Michael Taylor was banged up. Tony Bowles was out. So they kind of had to ride Leroy Horde that entire game and pulled away late. Yeah, and won the game 28-18. Bo's final game at the Big House.
Ohio State could have tied for a Big Ten championship. They were a substantial underdog, got to within 21-18, and then Greg Fry threw a pick, and that closed the deal.
Which is exactly what he did the year before. In 1988, he did that too. And then in 1990, he couldn't get the first down. Greg Fry was short when JT was also supposed to be. So, yeah, I remember. I miss Greg Fry playing quarterback for Ohio State, actually. Those were some good days. Okay. But let's get to Michigan's quarterback situation. Michigan making the switch to the guy that I think should have been the quarterback all along. And because to me, Mark, as I mentioned at the top, and I have been screaming from the rooftops from the beginning, this is simple logic to me. Alex Orji is one of the best 11 athletes we have on the offensive side of the football. I don't know if you've noticed or not, we could use some athleticism on the offensive side of the football. I don't care how underdeveloped he is as a quarterback. 80% of quarterbacks in college football are Jags, 80% of them. And it's just a matter of what kind of leader are you? What kind of system are you in terms of what surrounds you, whether you're successful or not? 10% of them are guys who don't even belong on scholarship, are Deacon Hills, Davis Warrens. The other 10% are difference makers, guys who elevate the program around them. But that's very few quarterbacks in college football. Most guys are Jags. So we need someone that elevates this offense by making the running game a threat. We just don't have the receivers. Even if Davis Warren were a better passer, we just don't have the kinds of receivers to be spreading teams out 4 wide and doing straight dropbacks. That's just not the personnel we have, not the scheme we have. I think that someone who on every down is a threat to run with his kind of athleticism just opens up running lanes for everybody else. And that means to me, Davis Warren was going to have to be like borderline legit pro prospect to keep Alex Orji off the field. I don't care if Alex Orji completed 78% of passes in camp and Davis Warren completed 89. Camp ain't games. Okay. You're not getting hit, not getting taken to the ground. That the overall ceiling of this offense with a threat every down at quarterback with his arms or his legs, as opposed to a guy who's not a threat with either. Mark, we've had 28 offensive possessions this year under Davis Warren. We've turned it over on 7 of them. You can't win in basketball turning it over on 1 out of every 4 possessions, let alone in football. So the season to me is basically being reboot. They should have made the switch last week to give Orji Arkansas State, but here we are. I'm going to, take the optimistic fan side and say, well, on one hand, USC has no idea what we're running because apparently neither do we, So, but what are your thoughts, Mark?
Well, we are back to the starting blocks, and we are back to where we should have been in week 1. So our thoughts the entire offseason was that Alex Orji was the guy, because just what you stated there, for Davis Warren to be that significant of a difference maker over Alex Orji with that deficit from an athletic standpoint and added component to the running game, he better be Drew Bledsoe. Well, he's not quite Drew Bledsoe. So when Davis Warren is making his downfield reads and throws correctly, he can throw the ball pretty proficiently, but you just can't afford to throw it away 3 times against anybody that's any good. So obviously the mistakes just completely override any efficiency out of Davis Warren. So here we are. And I do think that your last point was a good one, and one that I've made a few times this week on my show, that USC doesn't have much to go on other than we know that this guy's not a throwing quarterback. We know that they are not going to lean heavily on the pass. They're going to lean on the run. We know that he is bound to take off a third of the time when he's in a pocket. If we take away a receiver or two, his first read and maybe his second, that he's going to take off. So we need to be gap efficient. We need to, of course, stay in our pass rush lanes. We need to not overrun the quarterback on the ends. We need to do all those things that are disciplined pass rush moves against this kind of athlete. But to me, it brings into question, okay, Sharon Moore. Okay, quarterback evaluation is a huge part of what you do as a head coach. And we had this discussion a few times, I believe, and I know that I've talked about this a lot on my show, because I think the quarterback evaluation is more important than it's ever been in college football for 2 reasons. Number 1, the position's more important because of the passing game. And number 2, because there's that extra layer of evaluation with the transfer portal. And we are seeing already, just through 3 weeks of college football across the nation, those coaches who are able to recruit, develop, and evaluate their quarterbacks and what they have in their quarterback room and the readiness of those quarterbacks, or at least one of them, versus do we have to go to the transfer portal? So that's obviously a huge miss for Sharon Moore. Now he gets the reboot. He can run a different offense with Alex Orji. We'll see how many throws that he's allowed to make and in what type of situations. Of course, they're going to rely heavily on the run, but if they're down 17-3 in the second quarter, how much did they open it up? I don't think you'd still do. The big concern from an entire team standpoint, I think, Steve, is that if this was the 2023 Michigan defense, then you can really go into a shell, play a phone booth game or rock fight. But I don't know that this Michigan defense, and maybe not just from a personnel standpoint, but the marriage of this defense and Wink Martindale, I'm starting to have different thoughts about it, even though I thought that was a great hire because of his experience. The NFL guys are typically smarter than the college guys, and they excel at this level. And the continuity of the system, and obviously he was the mentor to the 2 previous coordinators, and all of that seemed to make total sense, except he's blitzing way too much. I saw some numbers the other day that he's blitzing almost half the time, like practically twice as many times from a percentage standpoint as his predecessor, and that doesn't seem to be working. And we'll see if the blitz-happy Wink Martindale is going to work against Miller Moss. The Miller Moss that I saw in week 1 against LSU was pretty damn good.
Agreed. Now, Miller Moss has never started a road game in his college football career. So welcome to the show. And if he comes in here and his first start and lights up that defense, then tip the cap and move on. I can see some of the trend lines on the defensive side of the football. I think we're going to know a lot more on Saturday. You're basically playing the exact same offensive scheme that Texas runs, the exact kind of same offensive coordinator that Texas is. I would imagine it's going to be a carbon copy of that defensive scheme, where they're going to try to get Michigan running east and west to stretch them out so they can expose some gap discipline and things of that nature. And if Wink doesn't learn anything from that, then I think we can have that conversation next week. What I think is very clear from the start, when you look at some of its youth, but there are still 19 guys on this 2 deep that are on this roster, they're on the 2 deep in the national championship game. This isn't Washington, who had 3. There's plenty of guys that played significant minutes who are household names. One of them's on the damn cover of the video game. Okay, so I guess some of it's inexperience, but the penalties, the turnovers. We led the nation the last 3 years in fewest. We were among the nation's leaders the last 3 years in a row. Fewest penalties, fewest turnovers. So to me, that's a coaching thing. I know he came out and said that, Dominique Giudice graded a little bit differently than Greg Crippen. If that's your grading, then you're grading. You failed at grading. I mean, you just watch the game. I love analytics, man, but at some point we got to go actually with. We decide who makes playoffs, not by what the power ratings say the point spread would be, but by the results of the actual damn games, right? Okay, so I think power ratings, that stuff are great for predictive modeling, but you know what's better than predictive modeling? Game results. Game results are better than predictive modeling, Mark. All right, we saw these 2 centers play basically just switching possessions last week against Arkansas State, and the offense looked dramatically different in terms of, blocking at the point of attack with one guy in there named Greg Crippen and another guy in there who was a nose guard 8 weeks ago, so don't understand that. We played the wrong center. We're playing the wrong RB1. I mean, right now, Khalil Mullings, like the number 1 rated running back at Pro Football Focus in terms of broken tackles and everything else. So I think we clearly played the wrong quarterback. I think Sharon's in a little over his head here at the start, which is to be expected. This is a big job. Other coaches have come in here with way more extensive resumes and been swallowed whole by it. But I think there's another factor here too, and I think this has played into the quarterback decision making. I think that there is a great desire for a more balanced style of offense, and to demonstrate to recruits like Andrew Marsh, the big wide receiver who just committed here, hey, we're serious about telling you that we're going to make a more balanced offense. We just don't have the personnel for that right now, and you got to coach to your team, not to your scheme. You have to coach to the players you have, not the ones you wished you have. All right, you don't have J.T. Barrett, and when you have J.T. Barrett, you run the power spread. You don't run Ryan Day's air raid. You don't do that. When you have Braxton Miller, you run the power spread. You don't run Ryan Day's air raid. You don't do that. And I think that's a little hubris of a young coach. Well, we're going to run my scheme. I saw Rich Rodriguez try to do that too with Nick Sheridan and Stephen Threet running zone reads. That was just laughable. So I think there's clearly some coaching mistakes are being made right now, and it looks like they're at least trying to correct a couple of them.
And for me, at the end of the year, I would be evaluating Sharon Moore in a different light than I would an experienced head coach, because first and foremost, I was not in favor of hiring Sharon Moore as the head coach. However, I'm not going to sit here and say I predicted failure, because I did not, and he has yet to fail. He's lost 1 game to one of the 3 or 4 best teams in the country, and it looked ugly, and he's had 2 other games that were less than pretty against G5 teams. So I'm not saying that he has failed. I'm not saying that he will fail, and I'm not saying that I predicted it, but I just said I would hire an expertise, the culture, all of that. I got it. Plus, he stood on the sideline against Penn State, Maryland, and Ohio State, and at least for that 4 hours, he looked the part, and he got the team to 3 massive victories. So I understood what they did. However, if they had hired a Matt Campbell, for example, or somebody with a track record that knows what he's doing, and then they had a subpar season his first year, I would think, okay, there's an acclimation. Let's let him build it. Let's let him do it his way. There was just a transition here. Okay, they went 7-5, and they looked lousy, let's say, against the best teams on the schedule. I'm going to evaluate that differently than Sharon Moore. I don't know if I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt. He's going to have to make this a Michigan-looking team by the end of the year. For me, if I was in charge to keep him, if it looks like a mess, in a relative mess, a Michigan mess, 7-5, 8-4, but they're not competitive with the best teams on the schedule, I seriously consider giving him the heave-ho.
After 1 year, you think?
Yeah. They should have let this contract ride out. That's already the situation they were in anyway. I don't know why they wrapped up this contract right after the Texas loss. And yes, evaluate the guy over the next...
because of exactly what you just said, that's why.
Because he's inexperienced.
Because they don't want...
Or somebody.
because he's got more top 100 commits in the 25 class than Jimmy signed in the last 2 classes combined right now. And they don't want to lose those kids with the kind of speculation that you're doing. That's why you do it. That's why. But the amount of money that Sharon is, if this goes like Rich Rod year 1, I'd be surprised if that happened. Okay. But if this goes really south, the amount of money they're paying him, Michigan could easily get out from underneath. That's not a major factor. But I also, on one hand, do not think this is a premature conversation because he doesn't come with a track record of success, right? We don't really know. And if they go 7-5 this year, next year they're at USC. Next year they're at Texas. I mean, next year's schedule is not much different than this year's. Okay, so I think that if you go 7-5, here's the reality, and we talked about this a few weeks ago. And I listened to Bud Elliott on the Cover 3 podcast say this is a Florida State fan. Florida State fans don't care about going to a bowl game. Don't care. All right. It's Mike Norvell. It doesn't matter whether he's 7-5 or 4-8. What matters is there hope to believe next year we could be a playoff team. And I thought that was exactly right. There's about 20 programs in this country. Michigan's one of them. Every season is playoff or bust. All right. And if we don't make the playoff, are you leaving us hope that next year we can? It's college basketball now. It won't matter what your record is. All right. No one's going to remember what you were ranked. No one remembers who was the final number 1 team in any of the recent AP college basketball polls of the regular season. No one remembers. Okay. So, I mean, it's going to be about, did you make the playoff or not? So if they're 7-5, but even if they're 7-5, let's say they start like 3-5. And, pull a couple of upsets down the stretch, and one of them's Oregon or one of them's Ohio State. Well, your outlook for next year is way different than if you start 7-2 and then finish 0-3. You see what I'm saying? Okay. And so it really doesn't matter. Bowl slotting, all that stuff that we used to mentally masturbate to for years, and who is going to get this bowl slot in the Big Ten and get to play. Nobody cares. Well, maybe at other schools in the Big Ten they care, but the level we're playing at, we don't care. It's really about, are we a playoff team now, or are you about to make us one? And if you're not, you got to go. So that is kind of the new math for sure. And I think that he will not be given a long rope at all. I don't. I think that if they're not close to the playoff this year, and they don't make the playoff next year, he's absolutely and deservedly so on number 1 or 2 he's Billy Napier on everybody's hot seat going into the year 3, which tends to be self-fulfilling prophecies, because it makes recruiting and everything else just kind of shrink and the walls kind of close in around you a little bit. So yeah. I mean, if you're going to take over a team that has 3, 4, 5 potential this year or next NFL first-round draft picks, and you're not even a playoff factor whatsoever, and maybe especially if this quarterback switch works, imagine if it works, all right, and Michigan finishes the year 8-2 with Alex Orji. Aren't you sitting there thinking, what the hell did we do? We're out of the playoff because you had to screw on with a walk-on kid who had played 5 games of high school football in his life for a quarter of the season. What the hell is that? You know what I'm saying? So yeah, this is what happens to you. I mean, guys, if Cade McNamara doesn't come in off the bench against Rutgers in the COVID year and play his ass off, Jimmy's not coaching at Michigan in 2021. He's done. That Cade, if you want to know why kept playing Cade McNamara over J.J. McCarthy that year, Cade's a good leader, but it's also because Cade McNamara saved his job, guys. They freaking lose to Rutgers. And on top of everything else, he was done. Okay. So yeah, we are dealing with low margins for error when you're a program of the stature of a Michigan. That is true.
Steve, you hit on something. I want to expound upon it. This the Texas game leads us into USC that makes a perfect laboratory experiment with, USC's Texas, basically. How well were you able in your coaching staff, since we already have these signs of you being in over your head, not identifying the right quarterback, the right running back, offensive line issues that are supposed to be your specialty and all those things, although they did run the ball, of course, better thanks to Khalil Mullings largely last game. But you get a carbon copy of Texas again. So are you a smart enough coach, and is your staff well orchestrated enough to self-scout and improve, and then also to scout the other team that you've already somewhat seen live and in person, to be a better and give a better effort. Plus, does your team have enough pride that they got embarrassed the first big game in the big house? Are they going to let that happen again? But then to your more latter point about what this is going to look like down the road, and if Orji does work out, there on one hand can be a criticism of Sharon Moore making the wrong call, but there can also be a grace period to say, you know what, this guy's learning on the job. He's getting better. He made mistakes early. Look at what the team did late, and maybe that saves his job.
Yeah, I think all those possibilities are open right now, for sure. Yeah, I agree with that. All right, give us a final thought. What do you think about the game on Saturday between USC and Michigan, 3:30 Eastern on CBS?
I think that
first time USC has played at the Big House since 1958, by the way. Go ahead.
Yeah, Michigan had a home and home sweep, I believe, in 57, 58 or somewhere in that range. Okay, so I think that the logic is the same as the Texas game, but I want to be able to see past that. I think Michigan's got too much fight and too much defense. And this Alex Orji, well, it's not an experiment at this point. We're going to see it, that they should be able to put up a fight. I'm not going to give you a prediction right this second, but I'm going to say that USC is a lesser version of Texas. So if they've learned nothing from this and not improved, then we're going to see a more respectable version of what we saw a couple weeks ago. But I just tend to believe that's not going to happen, and that Michigan is going to be in this fight and maybe make it their kind of game and pull it out.
Yeah, how about the fact this is an experiment? Hey, Michigan's going to play the style of quarterback 80% of the schools in the country play. That's an experiment. I just that blows my mind. I mean, we're not resurrecting Jamel Holloway and running the wishbone here. Okay, I mean this is not. I mean, this is the offense most of the freaking sport plays. Okay, most of the sport does not play, dude. If you cannot just go straight drop back pass and throw to star wide receivers to win a natty without an athletic threat at quarterback at Ohio State, then tell me where the hell you can do it at, right? You know what I'm saying? I mean, where is it possible to have a NFL statue sitting back there just, slinging the ball across the yard like it's 1985? If you can't do it at Ohio State with the way they recruit at receiver, I don't know where you can do that. We didn't have that quarterback last year, by the way. That blows my mind. I agree with you. It's an experiment, but Michigan is just simply experimenting with pretty much what every other major program in college football does.
Alex Orji, check down, or run with it.
Are the majority, Mark, you covered this sport nationwide. Are the majority of quarterbacks in this sport a profile similar to Alex Orji or Davis Warren? Which one is it?
Oh, Alex Orji.
Of course it is. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So, okay. I mean, I granted at Michigan, I guess it's an experiment, but it's just simply what everybody else has been doing for 20 years. All right. All right. Thank you, Mark. Good to see you as always.
Thank you, Steve.
You bet. We asked you this X poll this week. It should be a quarter of the way through the season, not a third. That's my bad. A quarter of the way through the football season already. What do you think Michigan's final record will likely be? 38% of you said 7-5. That's my vote. 33% of you said 8-4. 19% of you said 6-6. 9% of you said losing season. Now, I asked this before the quarterback switch was announced. So I think now we should maybe ask this question again after you get to see this next week against USC, because that does change the calculus at least a little bit. I mean, these are completely different quarterbacks. That brings us to our feedback of the week, courtesy of Billy Dean in response to our poll. He says, why only these options? Because they're the only options I think are viable right now. Now, that was before the quarterback switch. I do think it's entirely possible that our entire complexion of the offensive line will change without being asked to pass block on a lot of 5- and 7-step drops like they have been the last few weeks. And with a straight drop back in a shotgun, out of a pistol with no play action element, virtually little or no play action element at all to slow a pass rush down. So, there's a lot of uncertainty now with Michigan's football season, the kind of uncertainty that we should have had come into the year, that we should just now be getting some answers to, but the quarterbacks or the coaches made mistakes. They chose the wrong QB1, they chose the wrong RB1, they chose the wrong center one. So we're kind of rebooting and starting over. So as of now, I think the variance of ceiling and floor is way wider, Billy, than when I made that poll. But at that time, this announcement with Alex Orji had not been made yet. And so I kind of thought the die was cast, but we'll see. That's why they play the games. All right, don't forget to like, rate, subscribe, share, 5-star review. If you're watching us right here on YouTube or listening elsewhere via podcasts like iTunes, we greatly love you and appreciate you. Please show your love and appreciation for us by doing those things. Helps us in the algorithm to know that more Michigan fans should be found, and they will seek them out for us and direct them to our show, and we love when that happens. You can also follow us in between episodes and on game days at Michigan Podcast on X, Twitter at Michigan Podcast. There. I'm Steve Deace. We'll see you next week right here on Michigan Podcast. Until then, go Blue.